So massive thanks to our listeners, whether you're listening live at this really early time or whether you're listening at a later time. Really delighted to have Daryl Norkett on board. This coming Thursday evening, we've got Daryl's partner, business partner, Karen Bennett on board on the panel, focus on project costs. Daryl, massive thanks first of all for being part of the 13-week ongoing Monday morning calls. I think you were there on day one, to be fair, the first week. Is that right? Or
did the first panel? I think it was on commercial. Can't remember now.
It was on commercial. I was never expecting to go 13 weeks, and just having a break. We are going to continue in July, whether it's going to be monthly or fortnightly. That format's got to be confirmed. It is tricky working out who the panelists are, to say the least. I don't have I have normally a great lineup for a year, but a year is usually 10 meets, not 13 meets. So in the last 3 months, I've had more meets than I've had for the whole year at Wood. And it's been
a year's worth of property meets in 3 months, isn't it, really?
I have. It's been a fascinating time, and massive thanks to those who've been involved. We've heard from Stephen Johnson, who founded Shawbrook, founded Lendwell. Delighted he's been on board. John East from KFH. Yourself, you've been on a number of panels. I think Karen's been on at least one, maybe two. Two, yeah. And Karen's going to be on this coming Thursday evening to relaunch the Evening Property Network. I did a Evening Property Network for the listeners in March, although the format was a little bit different. There were no breakout rooms, and it was more of an evening event, physical rather than a virtual. So some things have changed. Breakout rooms is one of the key things which has changed. And so
I remember that event well. That was memorable for me because that was the first day that we did the Clap for Carers clap. I remember everyone kind of dashing off for a couple of minutes.
At 8 o'clock, absolutely. That's correct. So, look, Daryl, in terms of the market, in terms of why are property costs so important for a lender to know, to understand? So this coming Thursday, as I say, Karen Bennett's on the panel, one of the partners. She's got a long history in Shawbrook as well, and property finance prior to Shawbrook, it has to be mentioned. As I say, James Wood from EA Construction, Ben Richards' favourite topic is costings, and with one of his favourite topics, the other one is sustainability, but that may be on this year or maybe on a future year. And as I say, chaired by Jack Jiggins, we've got Alex Hearn at Sealands Hearn. That's covering the monitoring costing side. It works very closely with lenders as well. So why is costing so key?
Well, I think most of your listeners will have heard the adage that you make your money when you buy in property. But unless you know what your refurbishment and development costs are going to be, even on a simple project, you don't know how much to buy for. So it really, with any kind of project-based property deal, it all starts with question number one, which is what's the GDV, what's the end value, what's the demand for those units, what the buyers look like. So everyone spends most of their time on that, including me. And then you work back what your costs are likely to be, deduct all of that, deduct your finance cost, tax, everything else that goes with it. And then you end up with a number, and that number is kind of the most that you can sensibly pay for a property and still generate the profit margin that you're trying to get. So really, costs are an absolutely fundamental part of trying to assess a deal, and I think it's the bit that most people forget, or they use very, very rough calculations that then turn out to be kind of wildly inaccurate, because each conversion project, for example, can have very different costs once you start realising what the condition is of the current building and kind of what's there when you strip the walls back. New build's probably slightly easier, but you still have lots of variables around the land. You know, is the site on a slope? Do you have to worry about drains? Do you have to worry about utilities? Have you got any land contamination? Is any remediation required? Are there any planning conditions that mean you need to do something particular to the scenery that's going to cost you money? There's lots of variables, lots and lots of variables. So what I find as a lender is that if someone comes along and they've done a kind of really professional job and trying to figure out exactly what those costs are, and the best spreadsheets always kind of have every possible cost sort of listed down one side and then a number listed to it down the second side. And not all of those costs are relevant to every deal, but it shows that a developer has considered all of the different elements that you need to think about before deciding to do a deal. And it's critical for us because quite often with our loans, we're funding those costs. And we're funding those costs on the basis that our loan won't go above a certain percentage of GDV. So every time those costs are wrong and they overrun, there's a problem to resolve that ultimately eats into the developer's profit with additional borrowing and additional finance costs, or needing to put more of their own money into a deal.
Look, Daryl, in terms of how developers can work with lenders, on what is it literally getting someone like Seal & Turn on board, particularly if you're not so experienced in development, but a chartered building surveyor company who's also project monitoring, also project management. Is it as simple as that, or are there things for people to be doing before? Is it working with a architect? Is it working?
Well,
what's the key things?
see, there's an order to these things in my mind. So you always need architect engagement early. And the reason for that is unless you know what you're going to build, how can you possibly cost it? And how can you work out what the GDV is? So the architect's really important in deciding, can I get 4 units in this or is it 5? What's the layout of this site? How can I kind of maximize it? What sort of product do I want? So architect engagement is always very early in the process because that's the what am I going to develop. You then kind of got the next stage, which is figuring out the sort of how bit. So how do I build it? And how much will that work cost me? And that depends on the complexity of the project. So on a very, very complicated, large new build site, you might want to get a building surveyor in early doors. But in my world, where we're mostly doing kind of refurbishments and conversions and things like that, most clients first would get some builders around and get some contractors around and get some quotes. And lots of people try to get...
Sorry, Daryl. Do you want to just elaborate on that? Because it's interesting the point John Howard makes, and different people may take different perspectives. Do you look personally, when you're a lender, at the size of the building companies who are either given the tendering quotes? Does it make a difference to a lender? And does it depend on the size? So if it's a refurbishment, possibly not. If it's a brand new build, then you are looking as a lender at how long the company's been established for, what the turnover is in terms of the building company. Does that come into play?
Well, yes and no. So there's a couple of things. So one, it depends on the experience of the borrower. So if our end client is super experienced and has delivered lots of refurbishment or development schemes before, then less worried about which contractor they use, because happy to trust their judgment, because their track record shows that they've got that judgment right. And we're the best will in the world as a lender. We're never going to understand the contractors as well as the developers working with them. And any lender who thinks they can is just, it's just madness. You can't. However, if someone is kind of newer, or they're doing a project which is much bigger than one they've done before, then we would put a bit more focus on who that contractor is. There's only so much due diligence you can do. So some of the larger contractors obviously have websites and things that you can check out. You can check out any contractor company on Companies House and you can see their abbreviated accounts, but abbreviated accounts are of very little value. So they'll show you the size of the balance sheet. For most contractors, that balance sheet will be minimal. They don't own property, they don't own plant often. So all you're going to be able to see is how much money they're owed in terms of jobs they've done for clients and how much money that they owe to pay suppliers for materials and things like that. It's not that useful. You can get a sense of the size of them. So are they very big or very small just by the numbers, but you can't really get a sense of whether they're going to go bust or not because you can't get any profit numbers from abbreviated accounts. So it's not...
So you're not looking at turnover?
You'd look at it, but again, you don't know whether that company's profitable or not. Large turnover, it does not mean profit by any stretch. And actually, it's kind of sometimes harder to figure out whether someone's profitable or not if they've got an enormous turnover, because there's lots of sort of wiggle room in cash flows and things like that. The other thing I look at, though, that I do think is valid, is how long has that company been trading for? So even if you've got a modest balance sheet, if you've got a developer telling you that it's a really good builder, they're really well known locally, they do a great job every time, and then you check them out in Company's House and that company's been trading for 10 years, take an awful lot of comfort from that, because why is this year going to be the year that they go bust, you know? They've clearly got track record. That sort of thing helps. When you've got the sort of mix of a brand new borrower who's never done development before or is doing a development much bigger than they've done before, you've got a contractor or a builder that's invisible, so no website. You've got someone on Company's House that's set up a company a year ago, perhaps they were a sole trader before or something like that, and you've got that kind of mix. That makes you nervous because you haven't really got oversight on any part of the jigsaw that looks sort of well established. But it's rare that I find that. Normally, you can kind of see the logic in how someone set a certain project up.
Can you have influence on what contractors people working with? Did you ever say to a potential developer that you're looking at lending, look, the deal looks great, we're not quite comfortable with the developer, with the construction company, the builder? Did you ever say that, or how do you say it without saying it?
Yeah, no, sometimes it's just a case of, you know, saying on this particular deal, we want a reputable large contractor. And that's all I'd ever say. It's up to the developer to decide who to work with. And a lender trying to force a certain contractor on a borrower, that for me is a recipe for disaster, because those people need to work together every day for months to deliver that scheme. So it's not just about the size of the firm, it's also about them being able to work together and get on. So it's not for a lender to say which contractor to use, in my opinion, but if it's a particular project where we know we're going to want to see someone who's got a good track record and who's reputable, then we leave it at that and let the developers decide which firm to use out of the many firms that fall into that category.
Okay, so Daryl, this week is a week long of events. So as I say, delighted Karen Bennett is going to be on the panel this coming Thursday evening. As I say, in terms of the events going forward, just taking a break next week and then just sharpening the saw, as they say, and just focusing on what's key going forward in July onwards. So for the listeners out there, some calls for action. If there's particular panelists you'd like to hear, if there's particular topics you'd like to hear, I'm definitely open to suggestions. I'm open to some experimentation, because to be fair, before COVID-19, the amount of online activity in terms of interviews was generally one-to-one interviews using Zoom, but on a one-to-one, not one-to-many basis. So I'm still open to some sense of experimentation. So feel free, if there's a particular panelist you'd like to hear, if there's a particular topic possibly more important. So look, I just want to say massive thanks for being part of, as I say, the 13-week experiment. We're going to come to an end at Friday afternoon at 5 p.m, Friday at 4 p.m. It's the Property Happy Hour. Delighted we've got the likes of Gavin Gallagher on that call. Gavin's got one of the largest office parks in Europe. I have to admit, I didn't realize it was until Aaron Yahara said that, and did look at the size of the site. It depends on, again, how you measure a site. Is it number of employees? Is it the actual size in terms of land size as well? Is there any final thoughts about yourself from Lendwell, what you're doing, what you think is new, what's going to happen? Anything you want to add, maybe about the market, where you think we're going? So final words from you, Daryl.
The last 3 or 4 weeks have been really busy for us. Really busy. Lots of new inquiries, lots of new deals going on, loads of activity, which is really encouraging to see. I think, for us, we're keen to lend. We're here. We want to talk to anyone who needs bridging finance, development finance, looking to buy property, improve property, whatever it might be. That's always going to be the kind of deal sort of profile for us. But in terms of the market, one of the big worries I had during the lockdown was, when we get out of the lockdown, what do people do? Do people go out? Do they not go out? Do they stay in? What's their behaviour? And there are some really encouraging early signs, actually, that people do want to get out. They do want to spend. They do want to get on with their lives. And actually, there's even a sense, I think, with some people that the lockdown sort of has created a bit of a devil may care type attitude, where it's kind of like, look, forget about the worries, let's get on with it, life's too short. So I think the human impact's been really interesting. I think some of the economic indicators are much more positive than I thought they would be. You know, we've already seen retail spending go up in May, property transaction activity looks good.
Sorry, Daryl. Retail spending going up in May?
Up in May, yeah, obviously from an incredibly low base, but it still went up in May compared to April. And you know, obviously food's driving that quite a lot. So clothing had a really bad May. Sort of electronics, consumer goods had a bad, but not as bad as clothing, and food did quite well. But it's still encouraging to see an improvement from April to May. So I think some of the economic indicators look better than many of us thought they might look like back in kind of March and April time. But I also don't think we're out of the woods. So everyone should be mindful of the phrase the stock market guys use around a dead cat bounce, which means that you get a very sharp bounce recovery in the market. It's not actually a recovery and it falls away straight away because of another event. And there is a risk of a bit of that. So I think market signs look encouraging, and particularly for property. I think lockdown's probably reinforced how important property is for people. But I think the next big road bump is October. So when we have the furlough scheme come to an end and we start to see what the damage of the lockdown was in terms of which firms reopen and which firms choose not to reopen, and the redundancies that may follow from that. So I don't think we're out of the woods, but at least there is some positivity and there's some early signs of encouragement, and we'll see where we go from here. But I think we all have to be mindful that there is very likely to be an impact on the property market, albeit it now looks like delayed to later in the year rather than kind of immediate reaction.
That's interesting, because last night I was on a bit of a plug for Property Investor News magazine. And I know you have to shoot off in a minute, so I'd try to be as quick as possible. But I was on the call last night, and the question was, I think, when are you most likely to buy? I'm just took a snapshot of the question, and I didn't see the actual results, but Richard Bowser from Property Investor News magazine confirmed what the results were. It's when is the best time to buy until end of 2020, and the options were June, July, August, September, October, November, or December. And Richard announced it was later in the year. He didn't actually say whether it was October, November, or December, but he said it was later in the year. So that's interesting what you're saying as well. Look, Daryl, we could go on, and I know you.
I expected an instant renegotiating of prices. So I expected pretty much every deal agreed in February and March that had completed to be picked up again in June and renegotiated. But that's not happened. And even clients I'm working with on live deals now that are looking to complete have tried to renegotiate and not been able to. So there's not this immediate price discounting just hasn't happened. So it'll be interesting to see what happens when the furlough scheme ends. I think that's the next big hurdle to jump.
Look, massive thanks for joining us. To our listeners, if you've got any questions, a reminder that Daryl's business partner, Karen Bennett of Lendwell, will be on the panel this coming Thursday evening. I'm sure Daryl's going to be on a panel at some point fairly soon as well. And the week-long events continue tomorrow. Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. we've got the future of the office sector, so it's going to be presentation led. Lots of the times over the last 13 weeks it's been panels, so different format this coming Wednesday morning. So massive thanks to our listeners, and thanks to Daryl Norkett of Lendwell.